What if I told you that a year after the fact, a person who wins the lottery and someone who suffers a paralyzing injury often return to almost the exact same baseline level of happiness?
I mean, it completely shatters our standard intuition, right?
Right.
Because we assume these massive external events are just going to, permanently rewrite our joy.
Yeah, exactly.
But human psychology is actually far more stubborn than that.
It really is.
Oh,
So, welcome. If you are someone who loves learning, you've probably tried optimizing your schedule, maybe your diet, your workflow, but have you ever tried optimizing your happiness?
that is the big question today.
Right. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating source, a transcript from a series called Immersion, and it tackles this concept of strategic happiness through the lens of positive psychology.
Which is a super interesting field.
It is. And our mission for you listening today is to answer a surprisingly complex question, like how controllable is happiness really? And if it is controllable, what are the actual tangible levers we can pull to increase it?
Yeah, we want to know what actually works.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this because I want to be super clear right up front. We are absolutely not talking about toxic positivity here or, cheap pop psychology.
No, not at all. The source material is firmly grounded in empirical research. Positive psychology, at least as defined in the text by a 2008 quote from researcher Christopher Peterson, is the scientific study of what makes life worth living.
Right.
The goal is moving average lives up to great, rather than just, repairing the bad, which is actually a massive paradigm shift for the field.
How so? Like, what were they doing before?
Well, historically, psychology focused almost entirely on pathology.
Oh, like what's broken in the brain?
Exactly. What is broken in the human mind? And how do we just get someone back to a baseline of zero? Positive psychology asks, okay, but how do we go from 0 to a flourishing plus 10?
I love that. But I guess before we can start pulling levers and, steering our way to greatness, we kind of have to define what we are actually trying to control.
Right, because the word happiness is just so vague.
Right. So how does the research actually quantify it?
So the text relies on a working definition from a positive psychology researcher named Sonia Lubomirsky. And she defines happiness as this dual experience.
Okay, two parts.
Yeah. On one hand, it's the immediate experience of joy, contentment, positive well-being. But on the other hand, it has to be combined with a deeper, overarching sense that your life is good and meaningful and worthwhile.
That dual nature is so interesting because it highlights a crucial distinction the source makes between two totally different types of happiness, hedonic and eudaimonic.
Right, which trace all the way back to ancient philosophy, honestly.
Right.
But modern psychology uses them to explain the sort of biological tension in how we seek fulfillment.
Okay, so break those down for us.
Sure. So hedonic happiness is short-term pleasure. It is the immediate, visceral feeling of gratification right in the present moment.
It's the sugar rush. It's like eating a giant bowl of ice cream or sitting in the front row watching a hilarious stand-up comedian. Like, it tastes amazing, it feels amazing while it is happening, but the thrill burns off almost the second the event is over.
Right. And if you only chase that sugar rush, you end up on this hedonic treadmill, constantly needing a bigger thrill to feel that same baseline level of joy.
Oh, that sounds exhausting.
It is. So eudaimonic happiness, on the other hand, is rooted in long-term meaning and virtue. And the text uses a really grounding, specific example for this.
I remember this part.
Yeah, so imagine sitting down and having tea with your grandmother on a Sunday afternoon, and then spending a few hours helping her with chores around her house.
Which, I mean, helping your grandmother with chores is not exactly a thrill ride,
Right, no one's getting an adrenaline spike from that.
You aren't getting a massive rush while cleaning out her gutters. Eudaimonic happiness is much more like a protein shake.
I like that analogy.
It might not be as immediately electrifying as the ice cream, but it builds this vital, long-term foundation for human flourishing. It gives you the sense that your life has actual weight and purpose.
Which leads directly into the central question of all this source material. If true human flourishing is a combo of these two things, how much of it is actually determined by our own choices?
Right, like, are we just at the mercy of our biology here?
The classic nature versus nurture debate.
Always. And the text references this famous psychology pie chart that was taught for years. Historically, the field divided human happiness into three distinct slices.
Right, the 50-10-40 split.
Yep. They argued that 50% was determined by your genetics, 10% was dictated by your circumstances, so meaning your income, your job title, the city you live in, and the remaining 40% was determined by your actions.
though modern research has definitely added nuance to those exact numbers.
Oh, for sure.
The genetic component, for instance, might actually range anywhere from 35% all the way up to 80%, depending on the specific study you're looking at.
Wow, 80% is high.
It is. But the core takeaway across all of the data remains unchanged, which is that a very significant chunk of your happiness is entirely in your hands.
And the text uses a car analogy that I think perfectly visualizes how these three slices interact.
Oh yeah, walk us through that.
Okay, so imagine your genetics as the engine of the car. You do not pick the engine you were born with, right? Some people are simply born with an engine that runs a little hotter or a little colder.
Right, that's the baseline.
Exactly. Then life circumstances are the weather and the road conditions you happen to be driving on, but your actions, that is the steering wheel.
And that steering wheel represents your daily habits, your cognitive frameworks, and ultimately how you choose to respond to the weather outside.
I do have to push back on the road conditions part of this analogy, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we look at that circumstances, slice the idea that it makes up only 10% of the pie, doesn't that completely ignore people who are in absolute crisis?
Oh, right.
I mean, if someone is facing eviction or they are dealing with a severe illness, their circumstances feel like 99% of their happiness, you know?
That is a highly vital observation, and the source actually puts a giant asterisk next to that 10% figure for that exact reason.
Okay, good.
That extraordinarily small slice for circumstances only applies if your basic fundamental needs are already met.
Ah, got it.
So if you are safe, if you have food in the fridge, decent internet, a smartphone, if your life possesses relative stability, then circumstances shrink to 10%.
That makes total sense.
But if someone is experiencing severe trauma or struggling to pay rent, that circumstance slice absolutely dominates the pie.
But assuming your baseline needs are met, getting a slightly bigger house or a marginally fancier job title isn't going to move the needle much at all.
Exactly.
Which is wild because we spend so much of our lives obsessing over the weather, thinking a sunny day will somehow fix the engine.
We really do. But the key, as one positive psychology professor in the source noted, is to focus on the difference between living at a 3 out of 10 happiness level and a 7 out of 10.
Okay, explain that.
Well, you do not control 100% of the pie. You can't just snap your fingers and go from a 1 to a perfect 10 if your genetic engine naturally runs cold.
Right.
But the gap between navigating your life at a 3 and navigating it at a 7 is a massive life-altering difference in your daily lived experience.
Yeah, that's huge.
And that entire gap is controlled by how you operate the steering wheel.
So if we have the steering wheel and we have a significant amount of control over our actions, why do we so frequently drive ourselves straight into a ditch of misery?
Because, as the source reveals, human beings are notoriously terrible at reading the map.
We really are. I mean, the source dives deep into this psychological concept called affective forecasting.
Yeah, coined by researchers Dan Gilbert and Timothy Wilson. Affective forecasting is essentially our ability to predict how happy we will be in the future based on the decisions we are making today. And the data shows we are profoundly bad at it.
Dan Gilbert actually wrote a well-known book on this called Stumbling on Happiness, didn't he?
He did, yeah. And the title is actually inspired by a Willa Cather quote cited in the text, which basically argues that one cannot meticulously forecast the conditions that will make happiness.
Right, you only stumble upon them by chance.
Exactly.
The source highlights a specific football game study from that book that I think perfectly illustrates the mechanics of why our brains fail at this.
Oh, the college student one.
Yes, so researchers asked college students to imagine how happy they would feel if their school's football team won an upcoming, highly anticipated rivalry game.
And of course, the students envisioned this absolute, unadulterated euphoria, right?
Oh, totally.
They pictured rushing the field, the music blaring, celebrating with their friends. They predicted this single victory would elevate their overall happiness for a very, very long time.
But they completely forgot about Tuesday.
Yeah.
They forgot that after the game, regardless of whether their team won or lost, they still had to walk home. They still had to finish their biology homework. They still had to wake up early for class the next day.
Right, the mundane stuff.
This reveals the core flaw in our map reading, you know? We zoom in on these highly specific, dramatic outcomes that we think will make or break our lives, and we completely ignore the mundane, day-to-day reality that actually determines our baseline mood.
We isolate the event from its broader context. And furthermore, we drastically underestimate our own mental resilience.
Oh, the psychological immune system.
Exactly. The text details this. Just as your physical immune system fights off a virus, your mind has built-in cognitive defense mechanisms to help you cope with bad outcomes.
So we think like failing a test or getting dumped will permanently destroy us.
Right. But when the bad thing actually happens, our psychological immune system kicks in. We rationalize, we reframe, we find silver linings.
We do the work naturally.
We naturally reduce the cognitive dissonance of the failure, which means we actually recover and return to our baseline much faster than we ever anticipate.
Wow.
We are bad at predicting our joy, and we are equally bad at predicting our devastation.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Like, if we fundamentally cannot trust our own brains to predict what will make us happy, how are we supposed to make major life decisions?
Well, the text offers a very practical, concrete solution to bypass this forecasting flaw.
Right.
You use a surrogate.
Okay, a surrogate, meaning asking someone who is currently living the exact life you're considering down the road.
Precisely.
But here is where I get stuck on the mechanics of this advice.
Okay, where do you get stuck?
The text uses a spicy food analogy.
Right.
If I ask someone for a restaurant recommendation and they absolutely love intensely spicy food, but my palate hates it, their Yelp review of that restaurant is completely useless to me.
That's a fair point.
So if I am trying to decide on a major life path like, the source specifically mentions the massive life-altering decision of whether or not to become a parent isn't asking other people just as flawed.
How so?
Well, my personality, my stress tolerance, and my values are completely different from theirs.
That is a highly valid concern, and it is exactly why the text insists you cannot rely on just one surrogate.
Oh, you need more than one.
You have to ask multiple people. You need a sample size of 3 or more people to get an aggregate picture.
Ah, I see.
By collecting multiple perspectives, you are essentially gathering average Yelp reviews for a life path, which smooths out the extreme variances of individual personality bias.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. The aggregation bypasses my own illusion that my experience will somehow be entirely unique.
Exactly. You might sit there and visualize, like, I would love living in that bustling city, but I would absolutely hate working that corporate job.
Right.
But research shows our actual lived experience usually ends up being remarkably closer to the average of how other people feel in that situation than whatever highly curated fantasy we visualized in our own heads.
Wow.
The surrogates ground you in the day-to-day reality, the mundane Tuesdays, the unexpected surprises, the actual boring challenges, rather than your imagined highlight reel.
Okay, so we use surrogates to help us pick the right road to drive down.
Right.
But once we are actually on that road, how do we actively grip the steering wheel every single day?
Well, the source provides 2 very specific frameworks from positive psychology to help us translate theory into daily action.
Nice.
The first framework, created by Martin Seligman, who is widely considered the father of positive psychology, is called PERMA+.
PERMA plus.
Yes. Rather than just listing out concepts, this framework acts as a comprehensive blueprint that shifts our focus from merely chasing internal feelings to actively building external structures that support human flourishing.
Okay, so what does it stand for?
It starts, naturally, with positive emotion, which goes beyond just the physical pleasure of eating good food, you know. It involves cultivating deep feeling states like gratitude and joy.
And from there, the framework moves outward into engagement, which involves finding flow states in your daily life.
Yeah, flow states. That happens when you are so fully absorbed and immersed in an activity, whether that is your daily work, a complex art project, or even playing a competitive sport, that your sense of self-consciousness just fades and you completely lose track of time.
You are functioning at the absolute peak of your abilities.
Exactly.
And then the framework emphasizes relationships. And I have to say, the source mentions an 80-year-long Harvard study on this topic that is genuinely staggering.
Oh, the Harvard study of adult development.
Yes, it is incredibly rare in the scientific community to find a study that tracks the exact same group of individuals for 8 consecutive decades, monitoring their health, their careers, their emotional well-being.
It's unheard of, really.
And the conclusion of following these people for their entire lives was that close, meaningful relationships, more than money, more than career success, more than fame, are what actually keep people happy.
Right.
The study found that strong social ties literally protect against physical and mental decline. Like, close relationships prove to be better predictors of a long, happy life than social class, IQ, or even genetics.
It completely redefines what we consider to be a healthy lifestyle.
It really does.
It highlights how deeply biologically social we are as a species. So, moving on. The blueprint that incorporates meaning, which is serving something greater than yourself, perhaps through community volunteering or aligning your work with deep personal values.
Right.
And finally, achievement, which is the simple but necessary act of setting goals and striving to attain them.
Okay, so that covers the core framework, the PERMA part. But the text also mentions the plus aspect, which incorporates modern additions to positive psychology.
Yeah, the plus encompasses resilience, grit, and bodily vitality, because it is exceedingly difficult to maintain a flourishing mind if you are neglecting your physical body.
The two are intimately linked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It also heavily emphasizes utilizing your specific character strengths.
The text mentions the VIA Institute for this, right?
Which assesses these character strengths. And to be clear, we aren't talking about hard skills like being good at coding or math.
No, we are talking about emotional strengths, like humor, zest, curiosity, and appreciation of beauty.
Right. It is about identifying what you are naturally gifted at emotionally and applying it intentionally.
So if your top strength is humor, you don't just use it to get laughs at a party. You strategically use it to diffuse tension with coworkers or to cope when life gets overwhelmingly difficult.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is that this entire blueprint largely focuses on external actions and life structures, your hobbies, your friends, your community goals. But the text also heavily emphasizes internal cognitive approaches to steer that wheel. Specifically, it points to cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Taming the monkey mind, as the source calls it.
Yes, the monkey mind. The underlying premise of CBT is that our initial knee-jerk thoughts directly dictate our emotional state.
Okay.
So CBT provides a mechanism to recognize, interrogate, and actively reframe inaccurate or catastrophic thinking patterns before they spiral completely out of control.
And the source gives a very relatable, everyday example of this.
The partner running late.
Yes. So imagine your partner is running late to meet you. Your monkey mind immediately jumps to rigid black and white thinking. They are always late. They never respect my time.
We all do this.
And from there, you start catastrophizing, suddenly lumping in all the other tiny, unrelated things you are annoyed at them about until you're just furious.
Right. So CBT interrupts that specific negative spiral by forcing your brain to answer simple, factual questions. Instead of accepting the thought, they always late, you actively ask yourself, when in the last month were they actually not late? Or what are a couple of my absolute favorite attributes about them right now?
But wait, I have to ask, doesn't this just sound like suppressing your real feelings?
How so?
I mean, if my partner is late and I'm sitting there waiting, I have a right to be annoyed. Isn't forcing myself to think about their good qualities just tricking myself into ignoring a valid problem and pasting a fake smile on?
That is a brilliant distinction to draw, and the text is very careful to clarify this exact point.
Okay, good.
CBP is not about invalidating your genuine feelings or pretending you aren't annoyed that you have to wait. It is about recognizing the immense destructive power of your own mind. You are actively choosing to harness your mental energy away from a catastrophic spiral that will ultimately harm the relationship, and instead steering it toward a nuanced, balanced perspective.
That makes a lot of sense.
You are interrogating the absolute word always. You aren't denying the fact that they are late today. You're just preventing a minor annoyance from mutating into a relationship-damaging fight.
Steering away from the catastrophic spiral. I love the mechanics of that.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
Okay, so we have extensively covered our actions and we have covered our internal mindset. But there's one massive, culturally obsessed over dial that society constantly tries to turn in order to fix our happiness. Income. Twisting that circumstance dial with dollar signs. Does accumulating more money actually translate to more happiness?
Well, the source tracks how the empirical research on income and happiness in America has evolved over the years. You might recall hearing, perhaps a decade ago, that there was a magic ceiling of $60,000 a year.
Oh yeah, and earning any amount above that supposedly didn't make you any happier. That study was cited everywhere for years as definitive proof that money doesn't matter.
Right, but that initial number failed to account for vital, localized factors like family size or the drastically different cost of living across the country.
Oh, sure.
And then, of course, a decade of inflation happened, so the ceiling eventually bumped up to $80,000. And a more recent article cited in the source puts that cap at roughly $110,000.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text is very explicit that at lower income levels, money absolutely buys happiness.
Unequivocally, the correlation is incredibly strong.
Because what that money is actually buying isn't luxury goods or status symbols, it is buying the reduction of chronic stress.
Exactly.
It is buying the ability to sleep through the night without panic. It is buying the ability to pay your rent, keep the heat on during winter, and not face absolute financial ruin if you have to visit the emergency room.
Right.
At lower incomes, money is quite literally buying safety and removing a massive cognitive tax from your daily life.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, once that fundamental baseline of security and basic wealth is achieved, the mechanics of happiness change.
The ceiling kicks in.
Right? You hit a hard ceiling of diminishing returns. As the text explicitly states, the more money you make past that $110,000 point, the less difference it makes to your daily emotional state.
Wow.
If someone is deeply wealthy and they are fundamentally unhappy, injecting more money into their bank account is not going to alter their neurochemistry or magically generate eudaimonic meaning.
Which brings us right back to the steering wheel.
It does.
For you listening, understanding the mechanics of these concepts is honestly an incredibly empowering realization. You do not control the genetic engine you were born with. You cannot always control the weather or the chaotic road conditions of your life circumstances.
Right.
But you do have a firm, direct grip on the steering wheel. By understanding that your brain is evolutionarily bad at forecasting the future, by utilizing multiple surrogates to practically test drive your major life paths, by structuring your daily life around the external engagements of the PERMA Plus blueprint, and by using CBT to interrupt the catastrophic spirals of your monkey mind, you have the tangible ability to actively, strategically optimize your own human flourishing.
You absolutely do have those levers to pull.
Yeah.
But this raises an important question, and it is actually a thought inspired by the very final observation in the source material.
Oh, what is it?
The text points out that this intense, relentless pressure to be happy all the time is a distinctly Western cultural concept.
Oh, wow. We view sadness almost as a failure of optimization.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with this to ponder.
Yeah.
In our relentless strategic pursuit of optimizing our happiness, in our constant, exhausting cognitive effort to minimize every single negative emotion, are we actually just stressing ourselves out more?
That is a great question.
What if true human flourishing requires us to occasionally stop optimizing, take our hands off the steering wheel, lean into the difficult emotions, and simply let it rain?
You cannot optimize the weather. Sometimes you just have to experience it. We will leave it right there for today.